Hi, Ian Roberts and Mastering Composition. So a couple of weeks ago I did that video on paint shapes, not things, and added a 20-minute demo, and over 90,000 people have watched that demo now. So I'm thinking, okay, people want to see demos. So maybe at the end of this one, you could just make a comment saying that perhaps doing a demonstration, a longer form demonstration once a month would be a good idea, and then I can start doing that. But I think the mixing of greens is a good one to do a demonstration on because there's a lot of closely modulated, nuanced colors all kind of coming out of these different puddles in the palette that you'll see. And I think it'll be a good example, and you'll see the palette, you'll see the canvas, and there'll be my voiceover. And you'll see pretty much the entire painting getting blocked in. When the whole thing's finished, I stand back and make a few adjustments, but basically you'll see the whole thing. But just before we begin, first, please do subscribe to the channel, or if you want to receive this email in your inbox every Tuesday, just sign up down below. There's a link to my website and you can get it there. I don't send any other emails, it's just that one every Tuesday. And just before we begin, there's going to be 3 diagrams, which I think will be really helpful before we begin. The first will be my palette, and the colors are down below as I put them in last week. So you'll see the colors. But I just want to show you the patterns I'm using for mixing, sort of in advance, and then you'll just see them in action as I start to paint. The second thing is I just wanted to show you the color wheel and where most of these colors are sort of falling on the color wheel. And the third, just a review of the structure that I showed you last week, just for a moment. So you see my intention, and all the colors and the contrast are being adjusted to that end. So I hope you enjoy it. So these are the colors I showed you last week, and that list is down below. Chrome oxide green, phthalo green. Phthalo green is a nasty color if you just start using it. You have to use it very, very judiciously. Chrome oxide green is a lower intensity green, but really good covering strength. And you'll see that when I'm working with shadows, I'm working here. And at the beginning, I used dioxazine purple. So I'm wanting to reduce the intensity by mixing it with its complement, and I want it to be cool because it's a shadow. And so I dioxazine purple, that one color, is sort of doing the job for both of them, for that chrome oxide green, dioxazine purple for the darks at the back. And then when you see when I'm in the light, I'm mainly using these plus white and chrome oxide green. And those 4 colors, I mean, you can get an almost infinite mixture. You'll just see, I'll just keep using them, and then phthalo green, orange, red, all those other colors, you'll see, I'll just keep using them. All the colors here I'm using all the time, particularly since there's these puddles of color here that I'm mixing into, so we don't even know what the color is really. They're just neutrals from all these colors here. So if we have a color wheel, phthalo green is very intense, about as intense a pigment as you can get. Mid-gray is here. And chrome oxide green, even though it's coming straight out of the tube, is not as intense a color. It's closer to gray than, say, phthalo green. And so you're going to be mixing, you can be mixing towards gray by mixing with the complement, and it'll just pull it down here. But the most important thing to remember is almost all the colors, if these are the pure colors of your palette, almost all the colors being mixed are way in here. They're not gray. They're clearly green and orange and yellow and pink and whatever colors they are, but they're sort of medium intensities here. It's very seldom that you're getting anything close to sort of pigment colors out here. And just as a reminder, the structure, the intention I'm painting to is to bring us into here. So there's where we started last week. There's the sort of yellow ochre drawing, basically, of what I'm about to paint. So now, chrome oxide green, ultramarine blue, and dioxazine purple. So we're getting that warm, now we're getting a little, I don't want it just to be cool. So I'm adding a little bit of orange, a little bit of yellow ochre. But primarily, see this one, I'm really getting the purple in there. You'll see when I put it in, it's very purple. I put green on top of that later, but that's both a dark and cool and neutral because the purple obviously is not got any green in it. But then you'll see, I'll put green in it later. But I just want that dark neutral. And the reason I start here, and this I'm going to spend a moment talking about this, is the simplest color to find is the most neutral color. You just got to get the value right. So that purple and that dark green is the easiest color to get right because it's just going to do a simple job at the back as to be dark. You just got to get it dark enough, and then you can start pulling. Now you can see I'm getting more green on that side because, you know, if you look at the photograph, there's way more light on the left-hand side, and you'll see I'll keep putting more color here. I'm probably starting to do that now. Putting more, well, no, I'm still trying to get some greens back into that purple so it's not too overwhelming. But you see how that job of the first color just allows me to sort of get started with the dark. And now I want to start emphasizing some of these darks. They're still way back there in the shadows, very low intensity greens compared to what's going to be happening later on. But there's just modulation of those things. And you can see I just keep using those three, dioxazine, and there I'm just forming the shape of that field that I'm about to put in. But dioxazine, ultramarine blue, and chrome oxide green. That's sort of doing most of the job back there. But then as it starts to get, well, this is that field. So this is supposed to be a warm sort of ochre field, but I don't want it to be as bright as back there. So I'm just putting in something to create the sense of that shape. And then now there's light starting to hit some of these things on that side. Still really in shadow. It's just lighter on that side. So here you'll see this is the first time. But now you see I'm starting to pull from the lit side because these trees, they're not really lit, but they're certainly not in shadow the way they are on the left-hand side. But you can see they're all in a family. You can see that those 4 or 5 colors are all in a family, and I'm just using different proportions to get all those things to sort of pop just enough. Now there's a sense of, oh, there's a little bit of light there. Put in a dark in there to make sure that it falls back. And then this, I think, is the first color where we actually have the sunlight hitting. There's that first tree, and it's lighter. It's not a crazy intense color. It's lighter, but now it's a clear lit shape, particularly against that shadow shape behind it. And then now you'll see that I'm going to put all these different trees in all along this edge, and now I've got alizarin in there and yellow ochre, really making a very neutral green there next to that tree. And then, you know, in each case, this one is sort of like a pale olive tree or something, you see, and it's really quite a bit lighter and paler than the next. And this one has phthalo green in it. That's an intense green because this is the most, if you look carefully at the photograph, this is the most intense green in the entire photograph. So I'm just putting one intense hit, still a long way from pure color. And then there's one there that's sort of more muted. You can see I'm putting orange and yellow ochre in it, sort of grays it out there. But you can see there's a wide variety of colors in that group, and there's a wide variety of colors in the painting as well to create that sense of the different shapes. Very simple shapes though, right? They're not sort of articulated with leaves and branches. Then I realized, oh, these trees need to be further down because. So then we're going to need some darks, and there's a ridge at the back of the green field there where it kind of joins all the shadowed trees, and I sort of just need that darker right over there, just kind of fit it into that ridge. And then there's some trees, and they're all sort of in this family of different amounts of chrome oxide green in the purple. Tiny little bit of phthalo, just to sort of give the sense of a couple of those trees there. And then, of course, the shadow shapes of the trees themselves, particularly on the underneath side. You see, I just kind of dragged the brush up in the same direction that the tree's growing. At that distance, you just sort of see them as vertical shapes. And so I'm adjusting the shadow shape a little bit, but for the most part, they're not that different. But they're just down at the bottom and just sort of flicking up to give it a little bit of form. Now this, I think I'm coming to the first big field of oats or whatever that is out there. So now it's more like yellow ochre, cad yellow, and tiny little bit of purple just to sort of gray it out a little bit. And you'll see I'll kind of play with that between yellow ochre and purple to just sort of give it there. And then I want it, like I mentioned at the beginning, the sort of center of interest is this hit of orange, sorry, so obviously we're using orange now, for this field right there. That's where I want you to look. That's not an intense color, is it? It's certainly orange, but it's certainly not intense, but it'll probably do the job. You know, maybe by the time we're finished, we have to adjust it, but you sort of get the idea. And then I need to make sure that the shadow shapes are coming right down into that field. And then we're going to mix up the next field of green here. And you can see that it's just sort of the same 4 or 5 colors, but there's so much variety you can pull out of them to say, oh, this is a little different than that. You just touch a little bit of phthalo in there and you sort of pop the green. But you can see I'm just sort of pulling a dark just out of there because I just think it's too intense a color. I mean, a lot of it is just how modulated you can make all these colors in low intensity and still have them work. Now that one is a step forward from that other group, and I want to get a shadow down there to where it joins the field. And then again, I'll be mixing another, see, I'm looking for a neutral, but in this case yellow ochre, a little bit of blue, let's gray it out. But you see that I'm going to be putting in this, and not a little bit too purple, so drag in some of the yellow ochre above it. Tiny little bit of green. Okay, now we think we've got it. But you see, I've just muddled them, but they're all in the same family, and they're all low intensity. So there's a grayed out field. It doesn't have the intensity of the one above it, the sort of cleaner orange one. See, it's kind of a grayer color. And then you'll see that I'll mix different colors with it as those two interact. You'll see how you can see it's a different color, it's grayer, but you'll see that I mix now this kind of more purple color in there to really pull them apart. And then I get a more neutral one to sort of put in below it so that edge isn't quite so hard. So I'm just, fiddling the shapes here, but now there's the color I've mixed to go with that more intense purple. And then I'm going to have a little line between them. That's just sort of the edge of the grasses to say, oh, that's where the vertical is, and it's slightly different color. And then a little thin line doing the same thing between those two, and then just a little bit of dark. Not sort of, you see, I'm sort of, don't want it too dark, lots of yellow ochre in there, but just sort of some little bushes between those two fields. So you can see how I'm lightening them up. They're not straight dark the way the shadows are on those other trees. And I've got sort of a green that I'm mixing back and forth there to try to not get it to be too strong. But you can see how I'm pulling the same colors, the same sort of 4 or 5 colors, what variety I can get. See, look at this green. It's very different than the others, but certainly green. I mean, you look at the fields in the photograph, you realize they're not that different. You can't go crazy to sort of making them different. It won't look very natural. They're all very closely modulated. So this one has a little bit more intensity to it, and it comes up against that other one, and you say, oh, okay, that'll work. I'm not trying to carefully match it to nature. I want a natural progression of these shapes that works. Now I've sort of grayed this color out, and then I've added some yellow to it and made it a little lighter and pulled it into there. But you see, that's creating this next field coming forward. And again, the modulations between each of the fields is not that dramatic, but enough that we separate them shape by shape. There I've just sort of putting in quite a neutral gray to finish out that shape. I don't actually know where, I don't know where I'm going. These are the bushes here that are sort of back. I want to get those in, and you'll see that I'll have to put the shadows in, and then this one, I pull, it's just a different color, right? It's a little darker than the one next to it. It's not radically different. It's a very neutral kind of green. But now I want the shadow color underneath those bushes, and so I'll just put those, because those are closer. They can be quite dark. I know they're not in the photograph, but I want them there because it kind of roots them to the field. And then I need sort of a gradation. If you look at the photograph, there's a nice light line right along the top of it, and then it gets darker as it comes in. So a lot of the work now will be integrating. Well, you'll see this shape get sort of darker as it comes forward. But a lot of this, the rest of this will be integrating that pale line of grasses with this green that I'm putting here, just sort of integrating those shapes so that they feel like they belong together. So there I just have to soften that edge, and I've got something halfway between the two. And see, just sort of the same few colors are kind of doing all there. I'm just mixing more to kind of get that gradation working a little bit better. And then I need to get some of the darks down in the bottom, down in here, a little darker. And you'll see that I just make it darker as I come down into that corner. But you'll see, I mean, I'm just kind of doing these vertical brush marks. See, just like there. I've gone darker because I want to just sort of push our attention up, have it darker there and get it lighter as it goes up, so it kind of pushes our attention. But I'm shifting the color around, but you'll see that I am just doing these kind of vertical marks, pulling different greens in there, doing these vertical marks that kind of add up to, a bunch of grasses, without actually having to paint a bunch of grasses. Just kind of does the job there in the foreground without it getting busy. Now I'm going to get the dark side of all these grasses, the ones that are closest to the green to us. Need to get it a little darker than that, a little grayer. And there's the bottom half. You see in the photograph how it's sort of darker at the bottom, lighter at the top. So I'm going to make sure that I do that. And I want, see, it's exactly the same value pretty much as the green. Obviously a different color, very low intensity. But you can just see the interplay that I'm wanting to create here. Because you look at the photograph, they're just blended. They're quite distinct shapes. But the edges are very blended. And so a lot of what I'll be doing here is softening those edges so that everything is just kind of harmonized into these two shapes that are kind of, if you look at the photograph, kind of blend into one another, right? Except maybe perhaps along the top edge, which is where I will emphasize it. So this is the continuation of that sort of grayed out color on the bottom edge. And then I'll start cleaning that color up. You see, I realize, I need a cleaner color here. I'm just going to go right out to someplace clean, and I get the lit side. I'm calling it the lit side, but the top side where the light's kind of hitting it. And you see how I'm brushing it up into that color at the top and brushing it down into the shadow or the darker part on the bottom. So I'm really making a point of keeping the edges very, very soft here. I might have one or two places where I have it against the top edge of the green, like right there. I might emphasize that once or twice. But after that, all the rest of it, I want to have really soft. I want that top edge to lead us to the tree and back into the painting because that's part of the structure. But after that, everything else, I want to kind of integrate those two things together and soften them. So you see that so much of what I'm doing here is just softening edges, softening edges, softening edges. Even those little marks I just left there, I'll soften them out before. So, you can see in the photograph, it's all this stuff has got these sort of grasses growing thickly right in there and interplaying with them. So I'm just using the same color. You're not seeing the palette because I'm just pulling the same color off the palette. Just softening, softening, softening. So now I need the color for the bush. See, a lot of alizarin. So there's phthalo in there, but also a lot of alizarin. I got so much, I think I'll wipe it off. But yellow to give it sort of depth. You can see the green from the phthalo there, but there's a lot of alizarin. And then there's that nice rich green for that bush here in the foreground. And I've decided already that I'm going to stop the bush there. I don't want it to go all the way up into those other trees. And I'm going to put another tree in there later, you'll see. I think I'm doing it right now. Just because I just didn't want that bush, that long bush, to be so tall and skinny. So I'm covering up, I'm using the field color there to end the tree, so it's really clear where the tree ends. And then using a lot of white, chrome oxide green, and yellow ochre, just to get a really light color, like olive leaves or something, just to be a bush right there. And then it's going to need a shadow underneath it, and that will be, but there it is, right? Well, as it turns out, later on I realized it's right above, literally lined up with that tree below it. And I wipe it out there and I move it over about a half an inch. But so then I am just sort of trying to get the trunk in here and the shape. And this is going to be like the trunk, right? This is dark. But I'm not just going to some dark brown color. It's purple, it's got green in it. It's still in the family. Oh, these are the shadows for that. So it's still in the shadow family, but a little bit more intense. In order to kind of give us, a darker color for something that's actually closer to us. But you see the shape that I've sort of got is like two inverted triangles stuffed one on top of the other, so the points are, and I don't really like the shape, and I end up having to muddle with that too, perhaps after we finish the painting. But, I'm just sort of putting in a few bits and pieces here for the trunk. It also isn't like a trunk. It's just a bunch of twiggy things at the bottom, if you look at the photograph, that integrates with that field below it. I'm not sure where I'm going next. Oh, I know. I think these colors just seemed a little dull. And so I made a slight, you can hardly tell the difference, but I've got a blue in there. You see how I'm making it just a little bit lighter and a little bit more blue, so that the shadow kind of works as a resonant color in those shadows. And now I'm just got a smaller brush, and again, I'm just orchestrating the edges of how these two things function together so that one doesn't stand out too much. I think here I just see all those little spots there. I just realized too many. Just blend those out. Just get it simple. I think I'm just mixing a color halfway between those two so that edge isn't quite so hard, and then using a little bit of that to sort of make sure that there's an actual shape going out there and not just all feathered nothingness, sort of establish something there. And then I'm working again, getting rid of some of those shapes that I'd put in there on the tree. The tree needed some work. I worked on the tree a little bit afterward. Because I work through the whole thing and then stop and sort of take stock, and it takes an hour or something to paint it, and then, like that shape's kind of weird, right? So I'm just getting rid of the shadow thing there, and pushing that color back in there to sort of establish a shape that looks a little bit more appealing or interesting. But it's mainly sort of patching up here at this point. That field runs across there, so better line up on the other side too. This is probably more of that tree. I've just mixed more of that same color. Just sort of trying to make the shape a little bit more interesting. And then a couple of shadow colors just to kind of give it some shape. And one more touch and soften an edge, and there we go. And the original intention had been to bring us right to here. You can see the density of all these overlaps and the orange that kind of pull us to that center of interest. And the whole background is like a foil. Even though there's delineation back there, it's a foil for everything that comes in front of it. So let me know in the comments down below if you think the idea of a long-form demo once a month seems like a good idea. Please do subscribe to the channel or sign up for my email list. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you have a great week. I'll see you next Tuesday. Bye for now.